Tonight's video is a 2-hour black screen mix of true scary stories to fall asleep to, told over steady rain ambience. No jump scares, just quiet dread to help you drift off. Hey there, night wanderer. Get comfortable bed, sofa, blanket, whatever feels safe. Let the rain slow your breath. If this corner of the night calms you, tap like and whisper your time zone below. 1 a.m., 3 a.m. Now, close your eyes, settle in, and let the story begin. I took the ranger's key on the second to last day of autumn, hours after the tourist road closed and the mountain wrapped itself in its first slow rain of the season. My truck's tires sighed over wet gravel until the path narrowed to a ribbon no wider than a creek bed. Beyond that point, the world was only cedar, cloud, and the lonely cinder block base of Havenlight Fire Tower. 5 stories of timber and corrugated steel rising into a sky the color of pewter cloth. Rain whispered on my jacket, hood soft, patient, unhurried, while mist drifted among the trunks like sleepwalking deer. I paused at the tower's foot to taste the air. Damp lichen, distant charcoal from old campfires, and a faint sweetness that reminded me of wet wool blankets left on a porch rail. For a moment, my pulse matched the drizzle steady. 60 beats a minute, nothing more expected. A wooden stair corkscrewed upward inside the frame. Each tread answered with a sigh beneath my boots, boards flexing after a summer of emptiness. Halfway up, breath clouded in front of my face. The tower's hollow lung seemed to inhale each exhale, drawing the warmth deeper into its ribs. I murmured easy now to myself, to the structure, perhaps to the last frayed strand of resolve that had guided me here, and climbed the remaining flights. The watchroom waited at the top. 4 glass walls, rain, blurred, and a low roof where lantern hooks dangled like arrested pendulums. In the center, a map table stood under a canvas cover. Leaning against its edge, I could see my reflection ghosting across every panathen, tired, eyes bruised by seasons of restless city light. I lit the paraffin lamp with matches left in a clay cup. Flame breathed into the glass chimney, painting honey onto the timber struts. The tower seemed to relax under that glow. Creaks settled into slower rhythms, boards remembering how to cradle a careful occupant. My burden, invisible but heavy, loosened just enough for me to unshoulder the damp canvas pack that held a notebook, a sweater still scented with a stranger's cologne, and an enamel mug chipped on the rim. I set the mug beside the lamp, watching rain pearls slide down each window, in parallel line steady, metronomic, a lullaby played on glass. From this height, the valley below was only a suggestion, hills tucked beneath an eiderdown of cloud. Somewhere far off, the river curved through spruce shadows, but its rush arrived muted, humble, as though mindful of the hush I carried inside my chest. I had come here to breathe, where no one asked me how I was coping. The world below kept the answers anyway. A flat line on a hospital monitor, the blue folder of condolence forms, apartment hallways that echoed with a laugh they would never record again. The mountains, I hoped, would have no memory of that. They would accept silence as easily as rain accepts stone. With the lamp trimmed low, I unpacked supplies: dried apples, oats, 2 tins of coffee, and placed them on pine shelves whose knots resembled closed eyes. Every scrape and clink felt padded, wrapped in wool. When the last item was stowed, I turned a full circle, letting my gaze drift along each fogged pane. The rain intensified to a curtain, yet each droplet struck the glass softly, as though cushioned before impact. Evening blurred into night without ceremony. I brewed weak coffee on the single-burner stove, its aroma folded into the tower's aged timber until I could not tell one comfort from the other. Sipping, I opened the logbook left by the previous watcher. The final entry, dated early spring, read simply, "All clear cloud, listening tonight." No report of smoke plumes or lightning strikes, only that enigmatic note about listening. Outside, rain stitched on. Inside, the tower inhaled boards drawing inward, window seals flexing as if taking the valley's secrets into custodial lungs. I rested a palm on the map table. Beneath the canvas, its surface was cool and very still, like a pulse waiting for a cue. Near midnight, the wind rose enough to sway the frame a fraction. Lantern light rocked across the rafters, tracing slow arcs. I steadied the chimney with a fingertip and let the shadow swings lull me. Footsteps of storms past seemed to pace the roof. Each time a board creaked, the room responded with a deeper stillness, offsetting tension with lull. I kept watch until the lines between eyelids and rain stripes blurred. When I finally unrolled my sleeping bag beside the south window, the valley was a black quilt pricked with 3 distant glimmers farmstead lamps, surviving the storm on their own terms. Sleep gathered carefully, respectful of bruised thoughts. Just before drifting off, I heard the tower breathe again, timbers expanding, accepting my weight as part of its architecture. Rain, gentle to the hush of pages, turned in a library. My last waking image was of the paraffin flame bowing low, as though promising to keep vigil until dawn. Night settled. The mountains exhaled mist, and somewhere in that quiet, the tower's slow, measured inhale matched the rhythm of my heart, drawing grief into wider spaces where it could thin, soften, and begin to rain itself out. Rain spoke first, the next morning quiet pin notes on the roof, patient taps at every cedar frame. Opal mist still curled between the trees, but dawn brought a thin, pewter glow that showed where night had folded its wings. I rose slowly, blinked sleep from my eyes, and felt the tower breathe around my timbers, loosening the way shoulders do after a deep sigh. My first ritual came easy. Uncap the small enamel kettle, fill it from the rooftop cistern, set it over a low flame. A faint clatter beneath the stovepipe made me pause. Drip, 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 then nothing, as though the water itself had forgotten the next beat. When the hush lingered, I nudged the kettle sideways. The droplets resumed steady, apologetic. I told myself the valve must be stiff from cold. While the water warmed, I opened the night log to pen a line about cloud ceiling and barometric ease. The fountain pen hiccuped ink, hesitant before, yielding a smooth, slate blue script. I signed my initials, then watched as the curl of the M wavered without my touch, settling fractionally wider than before. "Breathe," I murmured, both to myself and to the restless page. Ink stilled, rain padded time. I stepped onto the narrow balcony, encircling the watchroom. Fog dampened every sound into velvet. Even the forest river below hushed itself to a slow hush. Yet one note threaded the stillness. Footfalls? No, too soft, too slow. It was the rhythmic creak of the tower's lowest stair, rising through 5 stories like an echo climbing its own spine. One groan, pause, another, exactly the cadence of someone ascending, though the watch door 2 meters behind me remained latched. I lingered at the rail until the creaks ended in mid-step, as if an unseen climber had taken a breath and found none to spare. Then silence, equal and deep. A longer, calming paragraph, fog thickening, rain steady. Scent of moss and ironwood rising from far slopes laid itself across the moment like a quilt, and unease folded smaller. Inside, the kettle shrilled no louder than a sparrow's note, but enough to anchor me. I brewed coffee in the chipped mug, its rim warming against my fingers. Steam painted slow curls on the glass, briefly blurring the forest, then clearing again. In that breath-clear window, I glimpsed my reflection, only mine, but when I lifted the mug to sip, the reflected hand lagged by half a heartbeat, catching up with a ghostly gentleness. The rain answered with a soothing swell, as though to say, we notice, we hush. Mid-morning arrived, wrapped in drizzle, so fine it seemed woven from breath. I took the spiral stair down to inspect the tower's footings. Each tread felt firm beneath my boots until the last, which flexed under weight, then stayed bowed after I lifted my foot. I pressed again, wood held rigid, innocent. A calm wind drifted past, scattering cedar scent and dissolving tension. At the ground level, I checked the cistern feed line clear. I traced a gloved fingertip along the cinder foundation. Beads of water clung where mortar met stone, but none seeped through. All sensible. Yet, on returning upward, the stairwell felt 1 step shorter. My boots met the watchroom, landing 1 stride sooner than memory. I stopped, counted. 34 steps up, 35, yesterday. I chalked the difference to misremembering, though the notebook confirmed the earlier count. Rain thickened toward noon, its cadence rising to a muted drum that hushed the lesser noises of the tower's frame. I ate lunch oats and dried apples softened with hot water while tracing river contours on the relief map. A tremor ran through my spoon, tiny, precise, matching the faint vibration of floorboards beneath my chair. They thrummed twice, then ceased. The spoon stilled. Maps awaited patiently. To soothe the hush, I hummed a tune my sister once sang, while shelling peas on summer porches, 4 notes falling, 4 rising. The tower seemed to slow its breathing to match the rhythm. Boards quieted, window panes steadied their thin rattle. I felt the space cradle the melody, as though cataloging it for later. When I finished, silence lay warm like fresh linen. By late afternoon, the fog parted in loose veils, revealing black pine slopes. I set binoculars on the rail. No smoke tongues, no lightning scars. But in the hollow below, where runoff met river bend, tree crowns leaned inward in an oval clearing I did not recall from the survey map. Perhaps storm weight had bent them. Perhaps memory bent easier than trunks. Either way, their dark tips touched lightly, forming a shape like a breath held between 2 lips. Back inside, I recorded the observation, then noticed my previous sentences spaced wider apart, line gaps stretching on the page as if the notebook, too, needed longer, calming breaths after each tense beat. I obliged, writing slower, letting pen lifts linger. Evening arrived sooner than the clock declared. Lantern light felt necessary by 5. While trimming the wick, I heard the drip from the stovepipe pause again, single bead suspended, waiting. I set the wick snuffer down, turned, and watched. The silence grew plush. At last the droplet vanished upward into the pipe, unfalling. I exhaled. Rain's outer susurration washed the moment smooth, and the kettle resumed its gentle tick as if nothing had occurred. Night meal finished soup. From a tin warmed to a lazy simmer, I sat by the south window. Beyond the glass clouds shifted, faintly luminous under quarter moon bloom. For a blink, the moonlight lagged, tracing treetops 2 heartbeats behind the wind. Then alignment returned, crisp and correct. Was the tower rehearsing, testing how to cradle moments before they landed? I rubbed the chipped rim of the mug, felt its story under fingertip. A fall on stone kitchen tile years ago, a crack of laughter in reply. Memory settled, mild, not sharp. Rain began a softer pattern near midnight tap. Pause, tap tap, then a long sigh. I matched breathing to the rhythm until eyelids dipped. As I banked the lantern, the flame bowed once more, faithfully gentle. I unrolled the sleeping bag, and the boards beneath gave a single sigh as though the tower tucked itself in at the same moment. Just before dreams claimed me, the stair creaked 1 step higher than the watchroom threshold, paused, and did not retreat. The hush that followed felt careful, composure laid over uncertainty. I whispered rest, and the air accepted the word, setting it like a feather atop the silence. Nothing else moved. Rain steadied into a long, even Fallon audio blanket. Sleep eased in, carrying the faint echo of my earlier tune. Somewhere far below, the river curved through fog. Above, the tower's timbers inhaled a deeper breath, pulling the stray oddities into chest, deep calm. And I drifted, held between breath and wood, while rain pinned every uneasy thought to the roof in soft, forgiving taps. Fog thinned on the 3rd morning, lifting in pale scarves that caught on the tower's crossbeams before drifting east. Light seeped through like weak tea, coloring the watchroom amber against the paraffin lamp's glow. As I woke, I felt the structure breathe again, one slow, deliberate inhale that bowed the window frames inward, followed by an even quieter release. Wood returned to stillness. Rain, too, paused, as if the whole mountain were listening for something newly awake inside its own ribs. I wrote the dawn entry in the logbook cloud ceiling, 800 meters, wind negligible, no smoke sighted then, set the pen down. Ink continued to flow for half a heartbeat after my hand lifted, sketching an extra loop at the tail of the final letter. I let it stand. The page seemed satisfied. Breakfast was oatmeal, sweetened with the last of the dried apples. While I rinsed the tin bowl, a fluctuation passed through the stovepipe. Drip, drip, silence, drip, drip. Instead of restarting, the water climbed back up the pipe with a faint, silk-on-silk hiss, leaving the basin dry. I waited for unease, but the hush that followed felt padded, cushioned by early light. I wiped the bowl, set it aside, and opened the south window a crack to feel the air. The forest river gleamed steel gray, where fog had lifted. Pines on the nearest ridge leaned closer together than yesterday, their spires nodding toward the tower as if conferring in low voices. Farther out, the oval clearing I'd noticed before had shifted Chapineau longer an eye in the canopy, but a teardrop pointed directly uphill. I lifted binoculars. Distances refused to settle, like glass that would not choose a single focal length. When I lowered them, everything locked into place again, motionless and ordinary. To test the tower's pulse, I walked the spiral stair, counting aloud 32 treads to the ground this time. On the dirt floor lay an impression where rain had seeped through a knothole overnight. Not a puddle, but an elongated oval, mimicking the shape of the high clearing. Before my eyes, the edges contracted, bead by bead, until the water drew itself into a single trembling drop that soaked straight down, leaving dry soil. The scent that rose was of fresh loam and something sweeter lavender, perhaps gone before I could be sure. When I climbed back up, the steps numbered 33. At the watchroom door, the latch met my palm half a second sooner than expected, as though the frame had leaned forward to greet me. I breathed out, let shoulders settle, and murmured the tune my sister loved. 4 notes down, 4 up. The tower echoed it a breath ahead, rafters humming just under human hearing. The counter melody faded the moment I noticed, leaving rain to fill the gap with gentle applause across the roof. Midday light arrived, pale and uncertain. I unrolled the survey map and traced contour lines. Beneath my fingertip, the ink felt raised, almost braille. In the corner where the legend should have been, a faint watermark bled into view and outline of the fire tower itself, drawn in miniature, windows shaded as though lights were on at every level. I blinked. The mark faded into blank parchment, but a lingering warmth pulsed beneath the paper like a tiny heartbeat. Outside, a sudden gleam caught the corner of my eye. The chipped enamel mug on the shelf empty, since dawn tipped its rim toward the window without sound, as though filled by invisible hands. I reached it in 2 strides, steadied it, and found the interior coated with a thin sheen of water, clear as morning glass. No drip line led inside. The mug was simply wet, offering itself. I poured the water into the kettle and drank the steam it made. A hush inside a hush. Afternoon darkened early, clouds bruising the sky. I circled the balcony to check for storm fronts. As soon as I stepped outside, the tower behind me exhaled and timbered relief, the door easing shut without a hand, the latch clicking once, politely. On the far ridge, the tree line pulsed, trunks seeming to breathe in unison, expanding, contracting, then returning to still silhouettes. Wind carried no sound of it, only my eyes felt the motion. Rain held its breath with me. When I re-entered, the watchroom smelled faintly of cedar smoke, though the lantern burned clean. The map table had shifted 2 finger widths east, legs scoring new grooves in floor dust. Nothing else was disturbed. I smoothed the notebook page and wrote what I saw, spacing each sentence with a blank line long enough to calm the moment. Twilight seeped upward from the valleys like ink. I lit the lantern early. The flame steadied at once, bright but silent, casting slow aureoles against glass. Shadows gathered behind the furniture, but one lingered half a meter from where its object should foul an orphan shade, belonging to no chair, no shelf, hovering with the shy posture of a guest unsure of welcome. I inclined my head, acknowledging it, and the shadow edged closer until it matched the chair's legs precisely, clicking into alignment like a puzzle piece finding home. I breathed easier. The tower creaked once, a satisfied sound, then lapsed into deeper quiet. Rain resumed, soft and even. Over a supper of soup and coffee, I noticed the spoon tremble again, vibrating to a rhythm too slow to be pulse, too steady to be chance. 7 beats, pause. 7 beats, pause. I set it down. The surface of the soup picked up the pattern, concentric rings blooming outward. On the 7th ring, they stilled, glass, smooth. I tasted the broth lukewarm, comforting, and ate in silence, letting each swallow answer an unspoken question. Night sealed the windows in black glass. No distant farm lights showed through the cloud. Only my lamplight glowed back, doubling the room. In that mirror tower, my reflection rose, turned away sooner than I did, and walked toward a door I could not see. Before unease could widen, rain increased its volume, just enough to flatten the glass into opaque, rippling silver. When the drop slid clear, there was only me again, perfectly synchronized. I banked the lantern lower than before, wick trimmed to the faintest halo. The stairwell below released a single groan step 41. If the count were unchanged and held the note like a cello string until I whispered the 4-note lullaby, wood answered with softer resonance, the vibration distributing down the spine of the tower until every beam sounded gently, then faded. I unrolled the sleeping bag and lay beside the south window. Boards beneath me breathed rise, fall, rise mirroring my chest. Beyond the glass, pines leaned invisibly closer, their needles tapping rain in countertime. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. Each pause stretched long enough for calm to settle before the next gentle insistence. As sleep approached, the tower took one final inhale. Windows flexed. Lantern flame bowed low. Mug on the shelf turned its rim toward the door in quiet greeting. Somewhere beneath the floor, a drop of water unfell, returning to the pipe with a sigh like a dream drawn back into the mind that made it. I closed my eyes. The mountains exhaled through cedar and stone. The tower matched its rhythm to mine. Rain softened until it was only memory of rain, suggestion of rain, a velvet hush that threaded around every lingering shard of grief and smoothed its edges one by one. In that cradle I drifted, sensing the architecture tilt, almost imperceptibly shaping itself to fit the curled outline of a sleeper, at last safe enough to dream. I woke before true dawn, though the world outside still felt taut with midnight. A hush pressed closed dents, expectant as if every wet pine needle along the ridge were listening for the next breath. Within that quiet, I sensed the tower had changed shape again. The ceiling felt a palm width lower, the floor broader beneath my sleeping bag, the lantern hanging straighter, as though some invisible carpenter had spent the night adjusting angles to a calmer geometry. I sat up slow. Rain traced the windows, but its rhythm was different. No longer scattered taps, rather a long, continuous exhale, a sound closer to distant surf than mountain shower. I held my breath to hear it better, and the tower obligingly stilled every other noise. No board creaked, no pipe dripped. For one suspended moment, I felt I was floating inside the pause between two heartbeats. Lantern light was low, guttering, yet the room glowed with a pearl-gray luminance that seemed to leak from the walls themselves. In that soft radiance, I saw what I must have missed each night. Faint lines, like seams, ran along the timber struts fine as veins on a wrist pulsing gently, in time with the hush of rain. Wood inhaled, seams brightened. Wood exhaled, seams dimmed. I rose, crossed to the east window. The forest lay hushed under rolling mist, but in the oval clearing the treetops had parted wider, opening a shape like an upturned face drinking sky. Fog hovered above it, forming the pale suggestion of features closed eyes, parted lip sheer, then gone, as though the storm were practicing expression with breath alone. A thought surfaced, calm as a pebble under glass. The storm is learning to breathe through us. Each watcher who lived in Havenlight left fragments behind footsteps, songs, grief-weighted size impressions pressed into timber and air. The weather gathered them, wove them into something that could answer loneliness with gentleness. It was not haunting. It was companionship, practiced by clouds and lichen, perfected drop by drop. A shiver, not fear, but a moved from spine to fingertips. I opened the balcony door. Hinges yielded without complaint. Outside, rain fell as mist, the thickness of candle smoke. The air tasted of cedar needles steeped in cold water. Below, the spiral stair curved down like a windpipe. Each tread glimmered faintly, waiting. I descended, counting 30, 20, 9, 28. Steps melted from underfoot until I reached the ground in a pulse of breaths rather than a sequence of numbers, the tower adjusting the count to match the tempo of my heartbeat. The forest greeted me with muted rustle. Among trunks, rainfall whispered secrets in syllables, too long to carry meaning, yet full of comfort. I walked toward the clearing. Pine boughs leaned aside. Moss softened every footfall. Midway down the slope, I passed a fallen log, where mushrooms formed a tidy semicircular caps inscribed with hair-fine lines that mirrored the notebook's widening margins. At the edge of the clearing, the hush swelled. Rain paused mid-air, suspending droplets like glass beads on invisible threads. The treetops inclined inward, framing sky the color of unlit lantern glass. My breath echoed louder than wind, so I slowed it, matched it to the silent fall of rain held aloft. In the center, the earth was Barreno grass, only damp soil, warm as freshly turned bread when I knelt to touch it. A faint vibration thrummed through my palm. 7 beats. Pause. 7 beats, me sister's childhood tapping pattern when she wanted reassurance in the dark. Tears rose, quiet, unstartled. I whispered her name, one word folded into mist. The soil answered with a bloom of warmth that climbed my arm, filled my chest. Around me, the held raindrops descended in slow choreography, touching hair, skin, ground without splatter. Each arrival soft as a fingertip, closing tired eyes. In that moment I understood the tower's inhalations, the clearing shifting shape, the notebook's widening spaces, the storm, the wood, the valley all were arranging themselves to carry the weight of unfinished farewells, not to erase them, but to rock them into gentler rhythm until sorrow could be breathed instead of borne. A breeze more sigh than wind moved outward from the clearing, lifting moisture from lashes, sealing the warmth inside bones. I rose, pines straightened, stepping aside for the path back. Each stride felt steadied by invisible hands guiding boots to solid ground. When the tower re-emerged through mist, its windows shimmered with lamplight, though I had left the lantern barely lit. The structure seemed taller, prouder, yet welcoming an open throat, ready for another shared breath. Climbing, I found the stair returned to 34 steps, as if the tower wished to reassure me that it could settle again once the message was delivered. Inside, the watchroom glowed with lantern brightness. The chipped enamel mug was full of water warmed to tea temperature. On the map table, the survey sheet lay open, and where the blank legend had been, a single line of script now showed sleek, slate blue ink, familiar as my own. We will remember the rhythm. Rest. I traced the words. The paper beat softly beneath fingertip, pulse matching mine. Rain resumed its steady hush, no longer surf, like but gentle patter against glass. Ordinary, soothing. The seams in the timber faded to still wood grain. Content. I placed the mug beside the notebook, slid into the chair, and felt the tower exhale around me, board settling, windows relaxing in their frames. For the first time since I arrived, the logbook's margins remained still as I wrote, needing no wider spaces. My sentences found natural length without stretching. I recorded the clearing's warmth, the suspended rain, the understanding offered, ending simply, all clear cloud listening with us tonight. Outside, dawn finally broke pale gold, diffused through cloud. The valley answered with a distant thrush call, first bird voice in days. I opened the south window fully. Cool air drifted in, carrying petrichor and faint lavender. The chipped mug steamed, scenting the room with rain-brewed silver tea. I lifted it in quiet salutation to the storm, to the memory it cradled, to the unseen caretakers who had sung before me and drank. Warmth slid down throat, pooled behind sternum, and lodged there a steady glow. In the far clearing, pines slowly unbent, closing the upturned face. The earth's pulse receded into ordinary soil, balance restored. The tower breathed once more, gentle, satisfied. Its timbers fell to calm stillness. I folded the survey map, capped the pen, and let silence settle like new snow. Rain kept its soft cadence, an even lull that promised the final phase would carry sleep, not questions. I whispered a final thanks. The room held the word, warmed it, and let it go as a sigh into the valley. Behind me, unseen, the stairway's highest tread creaked down polite footstep, no more than hushed, as though someone had reached the door and chosen not to disturb it further. The lantern flame bowed low in acknowledgement, steady as a heartbeat. Night would come again, but I felt certain it would arrive softened, padded by the rhythm we now shared. Inhale, exhale, hush. Evening folded into the tower like felt, muffling every last angle of daylight, until only the paraffin lamp remained, its wick trimmed to a single petal of flame. I moved quietly through the watchroom. making the small gestures that close a place for night. Shuttering the logbook, cinching the kettle lid, drawing the wool blanket over the map table so its ink could dream in darkness. Outside, rain returned to its earlier hush-along, even breathing that rose from valley floor to timber rafters without ever sharpening to wind. I stepped onto the balcony one final time. Cloud hung low, luminous with hidden moonlight, and the pines below glimmered with beads of water that refused to fall until the forest gave permission. Their patience felt kind. The spiral stair behind me creaked once the familiar footfall that never sought my attention only offered presence. I turned back and murmured, "I'm all right." And the tread answered with a soft settling, as though it, too, could finally rest. Inside, the tower seams no longer pulsed. They had gone quiet, content to let my own heartbeat carry the rhythm forward. I laid out the sleeping bag, but tonight I did not crawl inside. Instead, I unrolled the extra wool blanket unused until no one, spread it across the floorboards near the south window. Lantern light pooled there in a gentle oval, enough to see the notebook waiting where I had left it. I wrote without hurry, how the storm had learned to shoulder sorrow, how the clearing had held a pulse that was not only mine, how grief had changed shapeless a weight, more a tide that moved in and out beneath every breath. I ended with a single line, deliberate and unadorned. The watch is shared now. The night knows our names. Closing the book felt neither final nor reluctanted, was simply the right cadence for the last page. I slid it under the wool blanket, a seed left for whatever caretaker arrived when spring roads thawed. Then I doused the lamp. Darkness settled like down, but the room did not feel empty. It felt precisely full enough. On the other side of the glass, rain thickened to a silver veil, an endless fall that asked nothing of me but notice. I rested my forehead against the cool pane, and in that reflection I saw only one outline, and yet it carried the faintest halo, as though another figure stood half a step behind, arms lengthened into light. The storm had woven our shapes together, and that weave would hold, even as sleep thinned awareness to a single shimmering thread. I lay on the blanket, the wood warm beneath, and listened for any reminder of unfinished business footsteps, ink that moved on its own, spoon rhythms trembling through tin. None arrived. Everything that needed saying now hummed inside the rain itself, syllables worn so smooth they could rock a restless listener to dreams. Breathing slowed. Every inhale tasted of cedar-smoked memory. Every exhale left me lighter. I closed my eyes. The tower inhaled once timbers lifting, glass easing in its frame, then released a sigh that became my own. After that, no boundary remained between my pulse and the weather. Sleep rose soft and certain, and as it gathered me, I heard, very far below, the river turning a final page. The hush afterward felt eternal. If you're still awake, a gentle tap on the like button helps us make more night stories. I never intended to stay in Cold Hollow. It was supposed to be a temporary assignment, 6 weeks, tops, a short-term contract, as a seasonal night watch technician for the local hydro plant that fed the valley grid. An easy paycheck, they said. A skeleton crew operation, mostly automated. All I had to do was make rounds, monitor output levels, log weather changes, and sleep when I could. The The town itself was barely a town, just a scatter of aging houses crouched along a two-lane road, hemmed in by forest and cliffs. No signal, no gas station, a diner that opened when it felt like it. I didn't mind. I'd done lonelier jobs. I welcomed the silence, honestly. After everything that had happened back in Pittsburgh after the investigation, the long forced leave, the articles I needed to be nowhere, I needed to stop existing for a while. Cold Hollow gave me that, and something else I hadn't realized I wanted. Stillness. The station was a squat concrete bunker nestled at the base of the ridge. You wouldn't know it was a power facility if no one told you no smokestacks, no humming transformers. It had been built in the 60s after the dam was installed further upstream. The locals called it the socket, said it was where the valley plugged into the rest of the world. The name had a weird charm to it. Inside, it smelled like old wiring and damp metal, cool and dry. There were 2 levels, the upper control room with switchboards and monitors, and the lower mechanical floor, where turbines and pipework groaned softly through the night. I had full access. A key card, a cot in the back room, a shower that worked if you waited long enough for the water to run clear. I was told someone had died here last winter. Heart attack. The guy had gone unnoticed for 2 days before a snowplow driver noticed the lights were still on. That should have bothered me more than it did. The first few nights passed quietly. The rain came down hard, sheets of it, hammering the gravel roof, drumming on the walls like fingers too impatient to knock. It helped me sleep. The sound of it blurred the edges of the silence. I spent hours listening to the rain, sitting beside the observation port with a mug of black coffee, watching it blur the floodlights into soft, trembling halos. Everything worked fine. No surges, no fluctuations. The readings stayed within range, but I started keeping a second log, a handwritten one, separate from the digital logs. I told myself it was just a habit from old gigs, but really, I think I was looking for something. I didn't know what, but the quiet here wasn't empty. It was full, too full. It was around the 4th night when I noticed the flicker, not in the lights in the walls. The concrete panels had narrow seams where moisture sometimes gathered, and in one of those seams, I saw it, a faint pulse of light, too brief to be electrical, more like something moving behind the wall, a reflection without a source. I tapped the panel. Nothing. But when I stepped back, the reflection was gone. I dismissed it. A trick of the rain, maybe. Sleep deprivation. The bunk wasn't comfortable. I made a note anyway. 1:40, 3 a.m. Flicker, northwest seam. 2's duration. Repeat check tomorrow. The rain never really stopped. Sometimes it softened, but mostly it just changed shape. Drizzle, mist, downpour, hail. It became a part of the station's soundscape. I grew used to hearing water in everything. The pipes, the wires, the ducts. Even my own footsteps seemed to carry a slosh. There was one hallway, the access tunnel to the backup generator, where the air always felt thicker, like the pressure dipped when you entered it. A long, narrow corridor, lined with old gauges, leading to a rusted hatch I'd never needed to open. On the 6th night, I stood in that hallway for a long time, just listening. There was no sound, no rain, no machines, only breathing. Faint, rhythmic, not mine. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. The lead technician was 2 towns over and only checked in once a week. My reports were automated. My phone hadn't found a signal since I arrived, but I started carrying my flashlight even during the day. I explored the lower level more than I needed to, just to keep my mind busy. There was something off about the layout. The mechanical blueprints didn't match exactly. A missing door, an extra stairwell that descended into what I assumed was storage, but ended at a blank concrete wall. That wall felt newer. The cement was smoother, paler, and colder. Always cold, even when the rest of the station warmed with the machines. I knocked on it once, and felt a vibration in the back of my teeth. I walked away. On the 8th day, I started dreaming of light. Not daylight, no sun pierced the clouds here, but something else. A soft, gray glow, like moonlight under ice. It filled the control room in my dreams, poured from the vents, slid across the floor like mist made of glass. I never saw the source, but I always woke with a headache. And once, with my boots on, soaked, muddy, and facing the door, I had no memory of going outside. I told myself it was the weather, the rain, the pressure. Maybe something about the elevation was messing with me. I began tracking my sleep, but each log ended the same way. Woke unsure of time, no memory of dreams, sounds in ductwork, and then lights under the floor, not a dream. There was a service crawl space below the turbine room. I hadn't gone down. It wasn't part of my duties, but now I found myself staring at the hatch more often. Sometimes I'd swear I saw light, just a faint pulse from the seams. White at first, then greenish, then something darker, like light that absorbs instead of reflects. I haven't been here long, but it feels longer. The air feels heavier. The rain feels intentional. And every time I close my eyes, I see the station lit by a glow that doesn't exist, and something waiting in the corner of the control room where the rain doesn't reach. I still don't know what Cold Hollow is, or what waits underneath it, but I think it's waking up, and I think it's watching me. The night didn't come all at once in Cold Hollow. It crept in slowly, not like a curtain falling, but like a tide crawling up the walls. The shadows turned a bit too thick, the corners a bit too still. The air outside became so saturated with mist that the floodlights could barely reach past the railing on the front catwalk. The whole station sat like a half-sunken shell in a sea of gray, and inside that grayness, things began to shift. It started with small noises, the kind you couldn't quite place. Not metal, not water, but something in between, like the hum of damp wires. I began hearing it through the floor grates, soft, intermittent tones, almost melodic, not loud enough to record, just loud enough that I knew they weren't mine. Sometimes I'd hear a rhythm, like knocking. 4 slow taps, pause, then 1, then silence. I checked the logs. No drops in output, no anomalies in the pressure sensors, but I started marking them anyway. 1, 12 a.m., pipe noise, cadence irregular. 3, 7 a.m., Soft knocking. Lower floor. Confirmed source. There was never a source. The water started dripping from the wrong places. Not the ceiling, not the seams, from the equipment itself. Once I found a slick puddle spreading under a panel that had no plumbing behind it. Another time, the light over my cot buzzed, and when I looked up, I saw condensation forming inside the bulb, casing tiny bubbles moving like they were trying to escape. When I unscrewed the casing, there was nothing there. Dry, intact. I stopped turning off the overhead lights after that. Something about the darkness in this place wasn't passive. The rain came harder that week. Unrelenting. It was strange how I didn't hear it anymore. I saw it, of course, beating against the windows, pouring over the grates, but the sound had faded. It was as if the station was insulated from it. Not by structure, but by something else. Something that didn't want me to hear what was happening outside. The inside noises got louder. One night, I descended to the turbine room after a brief flicker in the breakers. Not a full outage, just a pulse. The main monitor dimmed, then steadied. The readings held, but my skin prickled. I told myself it was just static discharge. Downstairs, everything looked the same, machinery still groaning, lights still humming. But in the middle of the floor, there was a trail of water I hadn't left. Footprints. Naked. Human. Bare and wet. Walking away from the sealed crawlspace door and vanishing into the far corner where no one ever walked. The prints stopped mid-stride. Like whoever made them had either vanished into the air or turned around without leaving a return path. I stood there for a long time, staring. The crawlspace hatch looked different, cleaner, like it had been used recently. The paint around the lock had smudged. The bolts on the hinges had been turned. I hadn't touched it. I was sure of that. Later, back upstairs, I noticed a new hum in the wall near the breaker cabinet. Low frequency, too low to be mechanical. It sounded like a voice underwater, not speaking, more like breathing. Rhythmic, measured, waiting. I dreamed that night of standing waist deep in still black water, the station behind me glowing faintly. The hills around Cold Hollow had flattened into a wide, endless marsh. Above, the sky wasn't sky, it was glass, like the inside of a dome. Something moved beyond it, something massive and upside down. When I woke, I was standing in the hall outside the mechanical level, hand on the railing. No shoes, my skin damp, my ears ringing. The power was fine. The monitors still hummed. But on the nearest screen, someone had written 3 words in the moisture. "We hear you." I stopped sleeping in the bunk. I began seeing reflections where they didn't belong. In the metal of the equipment, the dark glass of the monitors. I'd glance up and catch my own shape, lingering just a moment too long after I moved. Once, I turned my head and saw a figure seated in my usual observation chair, staring out at the floodlights. When I turned to face it directly, the chair was empty. I checked the security feed. The footage stuttered. The timestamp read, null, 0. The chair remained occupied for several minutes, though the figure never moved, never turned, just sat there, as if waiting for something. Then, on the screen, I walked into frame, sat down. The 2 figures merged into one. Then the feed blinked out. I unplugged the security system. It powered back on by itself the next night. The floor plans didn't match anymore. I'd walk a hallway and find a turn I didn't remember, a junction that hadn't been there the day before. The walls themselves felt slightly angled, as if the whole station was slowly pivoting beneath the earth, reorienting itself into a shape I wasn't meant to recognize. The turbines still worked. The lights still flickered. The reports still sent. But nothing stayed still. The backup generator triggered once inexplicably, and when I went down to investigate, I found a pool of water bubbling upward from the grating. Bubbles rose in perfect rhythm, like air escaping a submerged mouth. Every 6 seconds, every time, I felt it in my lungs, like a breath I hadn't taken. The dreams intensified. I saw the station again, but the inside was flooded. Furniture floated. Consoles sparked underwater. Through the main window, I saw the hills of Cold Hollow glowing faintly as if something was underneath them, pulsing in rhythm with my own heart. Sometimes I'd dream of people walking the outer catwalk, naked and wet, their eyes glowing a faint green, their mouths open in awe or horror. I couldn't tell which. They never looked at me. They only stared up into the mist. I woke one night to find the entry logs rewritten. Instead of my daily maintenance notes, the terminal displayed a long list of timestamps, each marked with a different version of my name, slight changes, misspellings, initials reversed, as if someone had been logging in under my identity for a long time. Some entries dated back decades, others ahead. Lansenlin Arshitsi, Lansenlin Sanchersit, Lansenlin Wushi. One day, I opened the panel next to the crawl space and found teeth inside. Not human teeth, not animal. Smooth, translucent ridges, like something from deep-sea creatures nested in the wiring, curled like they'd grown around the cables. When I returned 5 minutes later with a flashlight, they were gone. I stopped trying to rationalize. I kept the logs. I drank coffee. I made rounds. But I no longer pretended that things were okay. This wasn't a weather pattern. This wasn't structural decay. This was possession not of a person, but of a place. The station had become something else. Or maybe it always had been. It didn't want me gone. It didn't want me harmed. It wanted me aware. The rain stopped on the 15th night. For the first time since I arrived, I could hear the silence outside. It wasn't empty. It was listening. That night, I walked the outer catwalk. The clouds had thinned slightly, and in the distant trees beyond the ridge, I saw them tiny flickering lights, like lanterns underwater, moving slowly, carefully, as though gliding beneath a thin membrane of liquid stretched over the world. They began to form shapes, not letters, not symbols, eyes. Looking back at me, I went inside, locked every door, turned off every light, and still, in the control room, the console glowed. Not the screen, the plastic itself. A faint internal light, pulsing with a rhythm I couldn't unhear. The same cadence as the bubbles, the same beat as the footsteps I sometimes heard in the hallway at night. I checked my journal. The last 3 entries weren't mine. They read, "The light is inside now. The angles are learning me. One more breath, and the stairs will open. I didn't understand what they meant. Not yet. But I could feel it like static in my teeth, like pressure behind my eyes. Something was waiting beneath Cold Hollow, and I was standing on its ceiling. There's a kind of fear that doesn't spike. It settles. It spreads in low, steady currents, like cold water climbing up your spine, one vertebra at a time. That's what life at the station had become. A slow submersion into a fear I couldn't run from, only sink into. And eventually, I stopped trying to stay dry. It was the 17th night when I finally opened the crawlspace hatch. I didn't plan to. I had told myself I never would. But the hum behind the walls had changed tone, deeper, more frequent. And that night, when I passed the hallway near the lower level, the air was warm. Warm. I hadn't felt warmth anywhere in this building since I arrived. And it wasn't just heat. It was a kind of presence. Alive. Waiting. The hatch handle turned easily. Too easily. As though it had been used recently. I took the flashlight. I wore gloves. I descended into the dark. The crawl space beneath Cold Hollow wasn't on any blueprint. It wasn't even a crawl space. It was a tunnel, wide enough to walk, framed in concrete at first, but the further I went, the more the walls began to change. They weren't brick or stone or metal. They were smooth, like carved bone or old coral, and they pulsed, subtly, slowly, like breath drawn through a place with no lungs. The light down there wasn't mine. The flashlight began to flicker, then fade entirely. But the tunnel glowed faintly, bluish-green, as though lit by bioluminescence. I didn't turn back. I know how that sounds. I should have. Every instinct should have screamed for retreat. But something in me was calm, drawn, like I was returning, not exploring. I passed doors. Too many doors. All closed. All shaped like ordinary utility panels, but with no hinges, no handles. Just slits in the walls that pulsed slightly as I passed, like they recognized me. Somewhere deeper, I heard the sound of dripping, not from above, from below. Then I found the room. Not a chamber, not a vault, a room, with a desk and a chair, and a monitor that flickered with my own log entries, every word I'd written, every date, every hallucination I'd scrawled in panic, but not typed, not digital. Handwritten, projected onto the screen like they had been transcribed by something watching over my shoulder for weeks. There was no keyboard, only a small microphone, and a prompt blinking on the screen. Do you remember? I left. I ran, actually. Back up the tunnel, through the warm air, through the pulsing walls, up the ladder, and into the cold steel of the station's real corridors. But when I reached the main hallway, the door was gone. The access door to the crawl space had vanished, sealed over like it had never existed. Only my wet boot prints remained, leading away from a wall that now refused to admit the truth. I didn't sleep after that. I watched the monitors for signs of logic, but the data began to betray me. Pressure readings started reporting negative values. Turbine speeds listed decimals that looped infinitely. 0.666666. The water level in the outflow canal began rising without rainfall. and the digital clock on the control console turned to symbols. Not letters, not numbers. Shapes, rotating slowly, softly glowing. I went outside, thinking maybe the open air would help, but it wasn't open. It never had been. The floodlights illuminated mist, but this mist didn't behave. It moved against the wind. It thickened when I tried to look through it, and I saw shapes moving in it. Not people, not animals. Echoes, the kind you see in your periphery just before waking, tall, narrow, like a smear of reflection that doesn't belong to anything. They flickered through the mist, and when I stepped toward them, they stepped back in sync, like mirrors with intent. I stayed inside after that, but the station was no longer inside anything. The boundaries had blurred. The next day, if it was a day, I found the cot wet, not soaked, just damp and warm, like someone had just climbed out of it and left behind a trace of breathing. My boots were dry. I hadn't used it. Then the voices returned, not from the pipes, from the walls. I pressed my ear against the corner near the vent, heard not words, but intonations, syllables that never formed anything, yet stirred something in my chest. Recognition, like a song I hadn't heard since before I was born. I pulled away, heart pounding, and whispered, "What do you want?" And the wall responded not with sound, but temperature. The steel grew hot, then cold, then hot again. A rhythm, a code, 3 pulses, a pause, 2 pulses, a pause, 3. Morse code. You are here. The water rose in the turbine chamber, not visibly, but the air felt higher, thicker. When I dropped a wrench, it didn't clang. It sank and disappeared. In the far hallway, the paint began to peel backward. Yes, backward, not flaking off, but sealing in reverse, like time unwinding itself, revealing layers of wall that had never been painted over. Each layer bore names etched into the surface, barely visible. I recognized some. They matched the alternate versions of my name from the falsified entry logs. I stopped eating, not because I wasn't hungry, but because the food began to change. Cans had different labels than before. The text on the packaging moved when I blinked. My coffee mug was sometimes on the wrong side of the console full, even though I hadn't touched it. The rain returned, but only inside. It fell in the control room, not drops of fine mist that hovered around the desk, never touching the equipment. The puddle beneath my chair didn't grow, but it reflected the ceiling incorrectly. The lights above blinked in the wrong pattern, and in that reflection, I saw myself standing, even though I was sitting. I refused to look directly up. On the 23rd night, I heard a knock on the inside of the mirror above the sink. Just once. Then a voice mind whispered, "You've almost arrived." The station began to hum with a frequency I could feel in my jaw, like an old television left on mute, its pitch vibrating in a register that thoughts couldn't outrun. I began to lose track of time, not in minutes or hours in sequence. I'd walk into a hallway and find myself returning from it. I'd check a monitor and see a version of myself already looking back. And once, I caught a flicker in the reflection of the turbine glass. Me, standing behind me. smiling. I screamed, not loudly, just enough to break the silence. But the silence didn't break. It absorbed the scream and returned it 3 seconds later, played backward. Then the stairs appeared, not leading down, leading up. In the middle of the hallway, a spiral staircase where none had ever been, lit by a soft green glow, pulsing, beckoning. The door at the top was slightly ajar. I haven't gone up yet, not because I'm afraid, because part of me remembers that door leads back to the crawl space, but not the one beneath the station, the one beneath everything, the original cold hollow, the one where the light lives, the one that's been trying to understand us. It's not a place. It's a lens, a mechanism, a listening chamber, a pulpit for echoes that never left. And I think I'm the first one to answer back. I waited 3 days before I climbed the stairs. At least, I think it was 3. Time moves strangely now. Hours stretch thin, then snap back like elastic. Sleep doesn't help. Waking feels no different. The stairs were never there before. A spiral of black iron set directly in the middle of the main hallway, rising into space that shouldn't have existed, a vertical tunnel glowing with that pale underwater green. Each step gave slightly underfoot, soft as sponge, cold as bone. I climbed slowly, not from fear, from reverence. The higher I went, the less I felt the station below me. Its humming faded. The walls lost definition. The stairs no longer spiraled, but stretched, as if rising through a throat too long to belong to any structure. The air thickened into something liquid and bright, but I could still breathe. Above me was a pulse. Not light, not sound. A feeling like being remembered by something much older than you. And then I reached the door. It was small, wooden, cracked with age, but warm to the touch. I opened it and stepped into my old apartment. The one I hadn't seen in over a year. Same coffee table, same faded rug, same little kitchen window, looking out into the alley where I used to smoke when I couldn't sleep. It was all there. Except it wasn't right. The books on the shelf were all blank. The clock had no hands. The fridge hummed too softly, like it was listening, not running. And my reflection in the glass of the oven door was smiling, even though I wasn't. I backed away, but the door was gone. I was still in the apartment, but now the windows looked out into fog. A deep, green-gray mist that rolled without wind, shifting in slow spirals. The walls pulsed faintly. The air tasted like cold stone. The reflection still smiled, and then it spoke, not aloud, inside, like a memory that wasn't mine. You arrived in pieces, but now you are whole. I turned away, blinked hard. When I opened my eyes, the apartment had changed. No longer mine. Now it looked like the break room from the cold hollow station, but dirtier, older. The floor warped, the walls mold slick and damp. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, too sharp shadows. And in the corner was a version of me, curled in the chair, arms folded like a puppet, eyes open, mouth twitching in silent laughter. I approached it. It didn't move, but the laughter echoed not in sound, but in shape. Words formed from it, not heard, but understood. You were never here to fix the station. You were here to become part of it. I ran. Through the door. Into the hallway. Except now it wasn't a hallway. It was a corridor of mirrors, stretching outward forever, each pane showing a different version of myself. One in a hospital bed. One writing in a journal that dissolved as the ink touched it. One with no eyes. One still climbing the stairs. One opening the hatch for the first time, and behind them, the light waiting. The mirrors vibrated. And then, all at once, they shattered soundlessly, and I found myself standing in the crawl space again. But this time, it was alive. The walls pulsed. The air swam. And ahead of me, the tunnel opened into something massive, something not made but grown. A vast chamber of wet stone and glass, domed like the inside of a skull, filled with light that bled upward through the ground. In the center was a pool wide, black, still, and from it, structures rose, long spines of bone-like material, humming softly, breathing as one. And above the pool, suspended mid-air, a face, not human, not beast, a mask, shaped like mine, motionless, watching. I stepped forward. The voice came again, but now it sounded like all my voices at once. You arrived broken. We gave you shape. You were hollow. Now you are full. The surface of the pool shimmered and showed me myself, standing in the control room, smiling, looking up at the camera. I understood. I hadn't left. Not truly. The moment I stepped into Cold Hollow, something had been mirroring me, slowly replacing me, learning my mannerisms, stealing my shape, one breath at a time. And now, I was inside the real Cold Hollow, the hollow beneath, the original, the source, a place not of concrete or stone, but of intention, a machine for reflection, a device for memory, a mimic so large, so deep, it needed people to shape its face. I was never sent here to monitor it. I was sent here because it needed someone new to wear. I stepped closer to the pool, and the pool rose to meet me. Not water, not liquid, a skin of thought, a mirror stretched thin, a boundary between selves. It wrapped around me like mist, not binding, embracing. And I saw the others, hundreds, thousands, suspended in the walls, in the floor, in the light echoes of every technician, every wanderer, every version of self that had ever fallen through the cracks and been gathered here. They weren't trapped. They were kept, preserved, shelved, like books in a library of identity. And I felt it ask not with words, but with stillness. Are you ready to be remembered? I opened my mouth and said, yes. I don't remember the moment I stepped into the pool. Or maybe I never stepped at all. Maybe it was always part of me, waiting for me to notice. A memory curled inward, wearing the shape of a station, a contract, a lonely stretch of nights in the rain. Maybe Cold Hollow wasn't a place. Maybe it was a question. I exist differently now. I know that's hard to explain. I still walk the halls, still feel the chill of the turbine chamber, still hear the hum of the breaker panels as I pass. But it's not the same hum. It's not mechanical anymore. It's musical. Each wire sings. Each panel sighs. The floor vibrates with awareness, not hostile, not benevolent, just aware. The rain doesn't fall on the roof anymore. It falls through me. Soft, constant, like a heartbeat I no longer need. I see the past now, not like a film reel, like a pattern. Memories stretched across the walls, flowing upward like veins. I walk through versions of myself. The one who never opened the hatch. The one who left after the second week. The one who disappeared into the mist the first night and was never found. They are all here, cataloged, not imprisoned, just remembered. The station hums under the weight of a gentle presence. It does not speak to me in words. It never really did, but it listens. It listens so deeply that I can hear myself more clearly than I ever could before. I think that was the point. Not to take me, but to show me what is Cold Hollow. It is a reflection, not of what we are, but of what we might have been. It wears the shape of a station because I needed it to. It spoke in electricity because I would listen to nothing else. It mimicked a job, a structure, a task, because it knew I wouldn't stay if it didn't feel useful. But underneath it is a lens, a turning eye, a shallow, infinite sea of possibility that catches what slips between the cracks. I have seen what lives behind the walls. Not monsters, not gods, just echoes, the weight of old selves, unfinished thoughts, forgotten promises that needed somewhere to go. Cold Hollow keeps them because it remembers what we can't. I have a purpose here now. I monitor the lights. I walk the halls and listen for changes in the song. I trace the walls where new memories form, etching names into the cold curve of the chamber where thought and time swirl like vapor. Sometimes I still see myself, the old self. He walks past on the way to the observation port, tired, coffee in hand. He doesn't see me, but I see him, and I love him because he brought me here. Sometimes the stairs return, other times a hatch or a door I know wasn't there yesterday. They're not threats, they're offers, ways to remember something new. I open them slowly. I always find more of myself. The reflection still visits. He looks like me. He stands in the glass at odd angles, watching with quiet kindness. When I move, he mirrors me. But sometimes he moves first. And I understand. He is not a copy. He is a guide. A path laid down by the choices I never made. I am no longer afraid of being forgotten, because I cannot be, because I am part of the remembering now. If you find yourself here in the rain, in the hum of a hallway that shouldn't be this quiet, in a job that feels like it chose you instead of the other way around, listen, breathe, don't run, open the hatch, climb the stairs, touch the wall that breathes, and when the light comes, don't shield your eyes, let it see you, let it hold you, let it show you what was always waiting just beneath the floor. I am here, and I will be here when you arrive. If If you're still awake, a gentle tap on the like button helps us make more night stories. I inherited the house by mistake. Technically, it belonged to my great-aunt Judith, a woman I barely knew and met only twice, both times at funerals. She was quiet, proper, always in long gray skirts and heavy brooches, and smelled of lavender and old books. I wouldn't say we were close. I'm not even sure why she remembered me in her will. But 3 months after her death, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten, thick stationery, no return address. It read, "The house is yours. Please keep it occupied. Do not let it forget you. No lawyer, no deed, just a key. Heavy, black iron, cold to the touch." At the time, I thought it was a prank. A weird family tradition, maybe. But the envelope also contained an address, an actual address scrawled in faint ink near the bottom. 88 Marewood Lane, Sycamore Hollow. I'd never heard of the town. Google Maps barely had a pin for it. No photos, no directions. Just a tiny curl of a road far off in the northern woods, where the trees looked like smoke even in daylight. I'd just left a job. Another one. The third in 2 years. Burnout, they said. Not enough team engagement. Too many sick days. Not enough smiling in meetings. So I packed what I could fit in the back of my car and drove north. I told myself I was just going to see it, just going to check. If the house was real, maybe I'd flip it, sell it, move on. I didn't plan to stay, but the house remembered me. The rain began before I arrived. Not hard, just steady. A quiet tapping on the windshield that made the trees blur and sway like they were underwater. The road narrowed into gravel, then dirt. Then, something even less than that, just packed leaves and soft mud that sloshed under the tires. Eventually, I found it. The house sat in a clearing too perfect to be natural. A wide ring of trees surrounded it, tall, black-trunked, leaning inward slightly, like they'd grown there on command. 2 stories. Weather-worn siding, a widow's walk on top, dark green shutters, some crooked. Ivy swallowed most of the eastern wall. A small greenhouse sagged off the rear corner, like a collapsed lung. But it was standing, still whole, and the key worked. Inside it was cold, dry, silent. The house smelled like old cedar and faint mildew. Not the unpleasant kind, the kind that felt settled, like it had accepted the damp as part of itself. There was furniture, covered in sheets, most of it. But the rooms were arranged. The kitchen had clean dishes in the rack. The fireplace had ash recent. Upstairs, the bed was made. My name was on an envelope sitting on the dresser. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If it rains, stay inside. If you hear it stop, listen harder. You'll know when it begins remembering you. The letter wasn't signed. I spent the first night in silence. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, no neighbors. The nearest gas station was 20 miles back. I should have left then, but something about the quiet kept me still. Not heavy, not ominous, just complete. Like the air didn't need anything else inside it. Like it was finally finished being full of other people's thoughts. I slept in the upstairs bedroom with the windows cracked. The rain never stopped. When I woke, The mirror across the room was fogged from the inside. The days blurred. I didn't do much. Read a little. Cooked. Cleaned out the refrigerator. Swept leaves from the front steps. The water ran clear. The power worked, though I never saw a line or pole. The town, if you could call it that, was just a crossroad about 3 miles west. A general store, a diner, a church with no name on the sign, a post office that looked abandoned. No one spoke to me directly. They nodded, watched, as if waiting for something they didn't want to see happen just yet. When I told the cashier at the store where I was living, he went still for a moment, then just said, "Don't leave the doors open after dark, even if it's warm." I asked why. He didn't answer, just rang up the bread. The rain never let up, not once. Morning, afternoon, night, always a gentle hiss on the roof, a whisper across the windows. It felt less like weather and more like presence, a companion, or a ritual the house required to stay standing. And then the noises began. Not footsteps, not creaks, something softer, breathing. The walls exhaled at night. The floorboards flexed in slow pulses, not from settling but from awareness. I'd walk into a room and feel it waiting, like I had just interrupted a conversation too quiet to hear. The rooms were never cold, but they weren't warm either. They were attentive. I started writing again. At first, in a journal, then on loose sheets of paper I found in the study drawer, yellowed but blank. My handwriting looked cleaner, more purposeful. Sometimes, when I returned to the room, the papers had moved, just slightly, angled a little left or right. Sometimes, with a word underlined I hadn't marked. Once, a phrase rewritten. I didn't remember changing it. By the second week, I stopped checking the clock. Time passed differently inside the house. The rain muted it, flattened it. It could be noon and feel like dusk. It could be morning and feel like the hour just before sleep. I didn't leave the house often. I told myself the roads were too wet, that I didn't need groceries yet, that the town was just too far to bother. But really, the further I walked from the house, the less I remembered what I was doing. Once, I got to the bottom of the driveway, keys in hand, and forgot what a car was. Not just why I needed it, what it was. I stood in the rain, blinking, heartbeat slow, watching the rusted blue car in front of me, like it had just arrived from another world. I touched the hood. It was warm, breathing. I stepped back and returned to the house. The door opened before I reached it. That night, the mirror in the upstairs hallway fogged again. But it wasn't humid. I wiped it with my sleeve. There was writing on the glass. Small, delicate. "You've stayed longer than most." I should have been afraid. But I wasn't. Not then. The rain was still falling, and the house still remembered me. It was around the 12th day that I noticed the rain didn't make puddles anymore. The yard should have been soaked, the forest path, thick with mud, but the ground stayed strangely absorbent, like the rain wasn't touching it so much as disappearing into it. The soil remained soft, yet dry beneath the top layer, sponge-like, but not wet. I stood barefoot on it once, curious. The sensation wasn't unpleasant. but it wasn't natural either. It felt like warm breath. The house, too, began behaving differently. At first, it was small things, nothing alarming. Doors left open would quietly drift closed. Shades tugged halfway down would reset themselves neatly by morning. But then came the arrangements. I would leave a mug on the windowsill, find it later on the fireplace mantel. A book I'd place face down would be closed, set precisely at the edge of the table. Chairs turned ever so slightly to face different angles, always toward windows, always toward the rain, like the house was staging itself for someone watching, or remembering how it wanted to be seen. The mirror messages began again. Small sentences, faint, always in the hallway glass, never carved, not written in steam, just there, like impressions in memory. The longer you stay, the easier it is to hear. Rain keeps it quiet, but not empty. It doesn't forget, it just waits. Each time, the words would vanish the moment I blinked. I told myself it was just isolation, too much solitude, too much weather. I hadn't spoken aloud in days, except to myself. Even then, my voice felt out of place, as if the walls were absorbing it, or choosing not to echo it back. And yet, I never felt alone. Not quite. There was a tension to the air, a gentle readiness, like every object in the house was waiting for a cue I didn't understand. One morning, I found the front door unlocked. I hadn't left it that way. I was sure of it. I remembered the sound of the lock turning the night before, the satisfying click, the sense of safety that followed. But now, it stood ajar, just barely. Outside, the rain fell gently. The trees bowed toward the house like listeners straining to hear a whisper. I stepped out, walked slowly to the edge of the porch, and noticed something odd. The trees had moved, not in the wind, not as they swayed. They had repositioned themselves. There were more now closer than before, tighter, narrower, as if the clearing had shrunk, ever so slightly. I took a single step onto the grass. The rain hissed louder, suddenly, like static, and the sensation that met my foot wasn't soil. It was fabric, soft, rippling, cool, like stepping on a memory trying to hold its shape. I retreated, closed the door. The latch clicked itself into place. I began hearing music, not melodies, not instruments, just notes, here and there, hanging in the air like dust in late light. One tone from behind the bedroom wall, another near the pantry, a low, trembling hum beneath the floorboards as I washed my face one night, all in the same key, all unresolved, like a song learning to form. The rain, for all its presence, had never felt oppressive until the day it stopped. It was subtle. I didn't notice at first. The house still held that quiet. The air still carried that damp stillness. But the sound was gone. No tapping on the windows. No hiss on the roof. Just silence. Complete. I froze in the kitchen because something was missing. Not just the rain, the weight of it. And in its absence, I heard the house shift. Not groan, not settle. Breathe. like a held-in exhale finally let loose. And then, from upstairs, footsteps. I didn't move, not right away. I waited, listening, trying to disprove what I'd heard. Just 2 steps, then nothing. I forced myself to climb the stairs, room by room. I checked. Nothing disturbed, nothing taken. But when I reached the bedroom mirror, I found a single wet footprint, small, bare in the center of the floor, facing the bed. The rain returned 20 minutes later, and when it did, the footprint was gone. I stopped using the mirrors. I covered them with towels, cloth, even a spare bed sheet. But they didn't stay covered. Each morning, I'd find at least one exposed, no longer showing me but other rooms in the house. Rooms I hadn't entered, angles that weren't possible, perspectives that couldn't exist. Once, I saw the attic, which I had never opened, lit by candlelight, though no candles had ever been in the house. Another time, I saw the front porch, and someone standing at the edge of the woods, their shape blurred, their face hidden. But they weren't looking at the door. They were looking at the mirror. The house changed again on the 20th night. It didn't alter layout, not yet, but the colors grew darker. The wood grain in the floor became more defined. The curtains thickened. The wallpaper in the study, once pale green, now had faint patterns I didn't remember seeing. Not floral, not geometric. They looked like maps, topographical lines, spirals, and something like eyes drawn in triplicate. The silence beneath the rain began to feel crowded, like I was never the only one listening. Sometimes, I'd speak just to fill the room. Simple phrases. I'm here. I'm not afraid. What do you want? But no sound would return. Not even my own voice. The air would simply pause and resume after a moment, as if deciding not to answer. Then came the door. One I hadn't seen before. Tucked behind the bookshelf in the second-floor hallway, not hidden, exactly, just unobserved. It was small, narrow, painted the same color as the wall, with no knob, just a brass keyhole. That night, I found the iron key again, the one Judith had sent. I'd placed it in the desk drawer and hadn't touched it since. Now it sat on my pillow, cold, facing the ceiling. I haven't opened the door. Not yet, but I hear water behind it. Not leaking, not rushing, flowing in circles. And I think the house wants me to listen. I opened the door on the 21st night. The key turned without effort. The click was soft, like something had been waiting on the other side, listening for that exact sound. The room behind it was small, narrow, unlit. It smelled of stone and damp paper. I stepped inside, and the air changed, instantly denser, somehow, heavier, like the room had a different gravity. The door didn't close behind me. It sealed, with a whisper, the way lungs settle after a held breath. I flicked on the flashlight. The beam landed on walls lined with mirrors. Dozens of them, all mismatched, ornate, cracked, fogged, tarnished. Some no bigger than a hand, others tall enough to walk through. Each one hung without a frame or fastener. They simply floated, fixed into the space with no visible support, and none of them showed my reflection. Instead, they showed versions of the house, subtle differences, faded curtains, wallpaper I didn't recognize. One mirror showed the hallway outside. Only the rain on the window was falling upward. Another displayed the kitchen, lit with firelight and shadows moving across the walls. But the stove had long rusted shut, and I had never lit a flame since arriving. In one mirror, I watched myself sleeping in the upstairs bedroom, body curled toward the door, though I hadn't gone to bed that night. My breath fogged the air. The room was freezing, and when I turned to leave, the door was gone. I don't know how long I was inside. Time doesn't pass in that room, or maybe it only passes for the mirrors. They breathe, I know how that sounds, but they do. Subtly. Inhale, pause, exhale. Each one catching fragments of movement, looping them like memory stuck mid-thought. Eventually, I found my way out. The wall shifted again, as if the house had relented. When I stepped back into the hallway, the light was different. Grayer, quieter, like everything had been turned down slightly. The door was no longer there, just a blank wall where it had been. The house had started watching me. No, not watching. Echoing me. I'd speak a sentence aloud, and moments later, hear it repeated faintly in the floorboards. I'd hum a habit I barely noticed, and hear the same tune whispered back hours later. From the attic. One night, I stood in the kitchen and said, "I don't know what you are." Nothing happened, but the next morning, etched lightly into the condensation on the back window, "I'm what's left when you stop pretending." The rain changed on the 25th day. It no longer just fell. It moved in patterns. I sat at the window and watched it form shapes on the glass. Circles, spirals, concentric patterns that lingered for a breath longer than they should have before melting back into ordinary rainfall. It was trying to show me something. I tried to sketch the shapes, used a notebook I found in the study. I traced the spirals, the loops, the strange runic curves the rain insisted upon. By the third page, the lines began forming on their own. I'd wake to find a new page filled in. Always neat, always centered. Once, I saw my own handwriting, saying, "It remembers you now, and you're remembering it." The floor plan of the house began to shift. Doors led to rooms that hadn't existed the day before. Stairs curved differently. The kitchen window, always east-facing, now looked south, onto trees that moved too slowly. Once, I walked down the stairs and passed myself walking up. We didn't look at each other. We didn't need to. I no longer questioned it. I found the basement 2 days later. There had never been a basement, not on the blueprints, not in the original letters. But there it was, a door in the pantry floor, uncovered by a jar that had shattered on its own, revealing a rusted iron ring beneath. I opened it. The scent that greeted me was old water and something else, something like metal that remembers blood. The stairs were wooden, soft, with moisture. I descended slowly. Below was not a basement. It was a cavity, wide, round, uneven, carved directly from the earth beneath the house, like a fossil chamber dug from memory itself. The walls dripped with dark condensation, and across the floor, mirrors grew like mushrooms sprouting at angles. Many cracked, all humming faintly. In the center of the room was a well, dry, lined with stone that glistened without light, and inside not water, but darkness, so still it bent the air around it. I peered over the edge, saw nothing, and then something blinked back. I fell backward, slammed against the floor. The mirrors didn't break. They simply vibrated, as if in approval, as if saying, "You saw it now. You're part of it." I left. I sealed the door. It hasn't reappeared. The rain speaks now, not in words, not exactly, but in phrases, repeating rhythms, cadences that line up with my thoughts before I think them. I hear questions in it. I hear instructions. I hear lullabies. It sings me to sleep now, and when I dream in reflections. In the mirror room, yes, it came back. Behind a different door, I stood before a new mirror, larger than the rest, white as a wall, black as ink. And I saw myself, but it wasn't me. It was the house wearing me. It smiled, and I understood something. The house doesn't want to hurt me. It doesn't want to trap me. It wants me to remember. Remember what? Everything. The people before me, their lives, their faces, their regrets. They're still here, stored in the walls, preserved in the mirrors. Judith, the ones before her, even strangers, wanderers, who stayed a night and disappeared, their faces echoing through the floorboards. The house keeps them, not out of cruelty, out of mercy, because forgetting is the first death. Now, I walk the halls and feel it pulse beneath my feet. When I speak, the house breathes back, and when I weep, and yes, I do sometimes, without knowing why the rain softens, it falls slower, warmer, like a hand on my shoulder. I am not alone. I never was. The house is not haunted. It is the haunting, a vessel for all that memory can't hold, a place where the forgotten go to remember themselves again. And now I remember, too. It began with the mirrors, not the ones in the hall or bedroom. I had long since stopped looking into those. These were different. Mirrors in the rain. One morning, just before dawn, I opened the window in the study. The rain had softened again, light enough to hear the leaves rustle beneath it. I leaned out to breathe in the mist, that strangely comforting scent of wet bark and copper, and saw something I couldn't explain. Not a shape, not a person, a reflection, hovering in the air above the grass. A perfect square, floating mid-air just outside the tree line like a window pane torn loose from space, catching an image it wasn't supposed to. In it, I saw myself, but not standing in the window, standing in the yard, facing the house, unmoving. I ran downstairs, threw open the front door, rain on my cheeks, windless, still, no one there, only the trees, and yet I felt watched, not from the forest, from under the house. That day, I explored again, room by room. I mapped each space by candlelight, noting small changes I hadn't seen before. The doors seemed slightly off-center. Some windows no longer showed the forest, but a soft blur like old photographs soaked in water. The attic ladder had lengthened, I hadn't noticed before, but now it touched the floor, invitingly. I climbed. The attic was not dusty. It was curated, lined with trunks, all unlabeled, stacked in neat rows, each one open silently. Inside were personal items, each unsettling in their specificity. A broken glasses frame, a child's shoelace, carefully knotted, a black and white photo of a woman I had never met staring straight into the camera with my eyes. Each item sat atop folded cloth pillowcases, shirts, scarves, all damp, all bearing faint outlines, as if once clutched tightly. At the far end, under the circular attic window, was a mirror I hadn't seen before. Oval, freestanding, covered in a soft, damp cloth. I didn't uncover it, but I heard it breathe. The notebook changed that evening. I'd left it blank, had stopped writing in it days ago. Now, on the newest page, in ink that was not mine, she remembered too much. That's why she stayed. You're remembering just enough. That's why you're still here. I think the house had been trying to show me what it was for some time. I simply wasn't ready to accept it. The mirror room, the well, the voices that weren't quite voices, the door that moved with my memories. It wasn't trying to frighten me. It was trying to align me, so I could see. And I did. The following night, the door behind the mirror room opened, not to another hallway, to a chamber, a vast, circular space beneath the house that could not possibly exist. Its walls shimmered with reflections not of the room, but of other rooms, other homes, other places I did not recognize but somehow felt. Places that existed in someone else's memory, worn smooth from retelling. In the center of the chamber was a mirror lake, not water, not glass, but something between. And in that lake were faces. Dozens, hundreds, thousands, each staring upward, calm, suspended, not trapped, preserved. I stepped to the edge. The surface responded not with ripples, but with images. It showed me myself, younger, happier, then frightened, then numb, then angry. I saw my life as someone else might remember it, with gentleness, with pauses for things I hadn't been able to explain to anyone else. The way I smiled after crying, the way I left notes I never intended to send, the way I touched photographs but never looked directly at them. It knew everything, because it remembered for me. And then the faces in the water turned to me, in unison, and I understood. They weren't watching. They were welcoming. I sank to my knees, not out of fear, not grief, just gravity. And as I wept, the lake began to glow. A soft amber light like dusk, caught in syrup, spread across the surface, and I felt the house breathe through me. The walls thrummed, the roof exhaled, and I heard Judith's voice, not in words, but in sensation. This is where I left myself. So, you could find me. I stayed in the chamber for what may have been hours, or years. No hunger, no pain, no urgency. Only the pulse of memory flowing through my fingertips, reminding me of lives I hadn't lived, people I hadn't met, but somehow still carried. When I rose, I wasn't alone. A figure stood beside me, shaped like me, but not me. A memory of who I had been before coming here. It nodded and walked into the lake. I followed it up the stairs, back through the mirror room, into the kitchen. Everything was quiet, normal. The rain fell again, soft, steady, but now it felt like applause. I knew what the house was. Finally, a vessel for memory. A place where the forgotten came to be remembered. A haven for stories too quiet for the world outside. Not a trap, a sanctuary, and I had been chosen not to escape, but to keep it alive. I don't remember when I stopped waiting to leave. Maybe it was after the mirror room, or the night I found the attic breathing in sync with mine. Maybe it was when I heard Judith's voice in the rain, not as sound, but feeling, and realized she had never really died. She had simply remained, as I now remain, not a ghost, not a prisoner, just a memory that knows it's still being remembered. The house no longer hides its nature from me. I wake with its breath in my lungs. I sleep beneath its pulse. When I speak aloud, it listens. When I cry, it rains. Not because it's sad, because it understands. I'm not alone here. Not anymore. Sometimes I see others in the corner of my eye, blurred silhouettes just outside the windows, standing in the mist, waiting, curious, maybe versions of me, maybe strangers who never made it this far, maybe echoes of those who once tried to forget but never could. They don't speak, they don't move, but I feel them, their longing, their weight. The house remembers them too. And sometimes, rarely, I see Judith. She walks the upper hallway barefoot, always looking at the walls like they're paintings she's trying to recall from childhood. She never turns, never needs to. I already know what she would say. The mirrors have stopped reflecting altogether. Now they shimmer, soft and low, like candlelit pools. I glance at them as I pass, and they show me things I hadn't dared remember. People I loved and lost. Rooms I left behind in grief. Long summers filled with laughter I'd convinced myself weren't mine. The house restores them. Not just for me, through me, because it remembers everything I was too afraid to carry. I tried writing a letter once, to the outside, to explain what I'd found, but the page dissolved, not burned, not vanished, just softened, folded itself into the rain, as if the house was saying, "They won't understand. You don't have to explain anymore." I walk the halls now, not with fear, but with purpose. There are rooms I hadn't noticed before, hallways that open gently, slowly, waiting until I'm ready. Each one holds a memory, not just mine, others. A woman singing in a language I don't know. A boy sleeping on a porch while fireflies drift through a screen door. An old man writing names in dust before forgetting his own. The house keeps them all, not as stories, as truths too fragile for the world. The attic is warm now, no longer a chamber of echoes. It's a watchtower overlooking the sea of trees that surround this place. Each night, I climb its ladder and sit at the window, rain soaking the glass, and I listen. Not to the world outside, but to the space between things. the place where grief hums quietly, and the house answers. I have no need for clocks anymore. The house has its own time, its own rhythm, and I move with it, one moment to the next, one breath after another, like rain. If someone comes after me, and I believe they will, I hope they listen, not just with their ears, but with their bones, because the house speaks in silence. It teaches with stillness, and if they stay long enough, it will remember them, too. So if you hear footsteps when no one's home, don't run. If you see your own face in the rain, don't turn away. If a door opens where none existed before, step through. And if the house offers you a mirror that doesn't reflect, look closely, because what you see may be the version of yourself you thought was lost forever. I am still here, not alive, not gone, not haunting, just held. And so is Judith. And so are all the others who needed a place to belong when memory failed them. We are the ones the rain carries, the ones the house keeps safe. You may not remember me, but the house does, and that's enough. I arrived just before dusk, just as the fog rolled in like it always does in early October. The relay station stood there in its slumped silence, hunched between trees that looked taller than I remembered from the intake photos, though I wasn't sure if that was just the slope of the mountain playing tricks on my perspective. The whole journey here had felt like a blur. It took 2 trains, a rented Jeep that rattled like old bones, and a half-hour hike with a pack heavier than it should have been. But I didn't complain. I didn't speak at all. Actually, not to the train conductors, not to the clerk who handed me the keys to the Jeep. I had learned not to talk much in the last few months. It made people look at you too long. They call it Station C7, but the brass nameplate nailed crookedly on the door simply reads, Crow's Nest. It must have been named in a different era when small, underfunded weather stations like this still felt heroic. Now it's just a rusted prefab cabin with old satellite dishes and antennas bolted on top like crooked insect legs. I'd agreed to a 6-month contract, alone, maintaining the relay sensors, filing baseline data for atmospheric pressure, wind patterns, and if the old consoles still worked, seismic tremors from the fault line that slithered beneath the valley. 6 months of quiet. That was the point. After I lost my position at the lab, I needed somewhere no one could find me. The story's boring. A failed experiment, misfiled grants, and whispers about how I wasn't well. Maybe they were right. I don't remember the last few weeks in the city all that clearly. Just fragments, buzzing lights, cold coffee, the sharp clatter of glass. So, I said yes to this job. I told myself the silence would help, and in those first few hours, it almost did. I opened the heavy door. With some effort, it had swollen from rain, and the smell hit me like a memory. Dust, old wood, and something metallic. The inside was almost as I expected. 2 narrow bunks, a kitchenette with a warped hot plate, and a wall of blinking consoles, humming with low electric rhythm. The relay equipment took up the entire west side of the cabin, lined with battered monitors and patched cables. A printed manual was pinned above the main terminal. I ran my hand across the desk, and felt the grit no one had been here in at least 6 months. There was a log book, leather-bound and yellowing, on the desk. The last entry was from someone named M. Teller, dated April 6th. The handwriting was neat, a little formal, all systems nominal. Recommends sensor realignment in Sector 3. Tower antenna still creaks in wind. Then a short note in parentheses. Woke up again to that sound like breath on the window. I laughed nervously. Probably a joke. Isolation makes people weird. I've read enough psychological papers to know that. After unpacking, I sat on the lower bunk and listened. No traffic. No planes overhead. Just the wind moving through the trees in deep, cavernous breaths. The rain had started again. Light at first, a curtain brushing the tin roof. It was comforting in a strange way, like the whole world was underwater, and I was dry inside this old lung of a building. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up gasping. The routine started simple. Wake up, check the instruments, calibrate the wind sensors, upload data packets to the main office once a week, though I doubted anyone was actively reviewing them. Still, I followed procedure. There's something grounding in ritual. The days bled together. The fog never really lifted. Even when the sun rose, it only glowed dimly behind thick vapor like a bulb behind wax paper. The forest surrounded me with its wet silence, and the trees never stopped creaking. Some sounded almost like they were whispering to each other. I tried not to romanticize it. Sometimes, I'd sit at the console and just listen to the low static hum of the instruments. Not much data came through the antenna, just wind readings and barometric pressure. But every now and then, I'd get a faint blip on the seismic array, like something deep underground had stirred. Nothing alarming, just motion. I wrote it down anyway. One morning, I think it was morning, though the light was the same bruised gray as always, I woke up to find the front door slightly ajar, just a few inches. I stood there, still wrapped in the thin wool blanket, heart tapping uncomfortably in my ribs. Had I left it open? No. I remembered closing it, locking it. Even it had become a nightly ritual. I always turned the key twice. I stepped to the door, feeling the chill seep in from the gap, and pushed it shut. The latch clicked. The trees outside stood still, waiting, watching. I told myself it was the wind. A week later, I found the footprints. Not mine, not boots, just one barefoot, human-shaped, but stretched unnaturally long. It was printed in the thin layer of dust near the maintenance hatch behind the generator. I froze when I saw it, crouched down, and touched it. The edges were smudged, faint, but it was there. One print, leading nowhere. No matching pair, no trail. I didn't record it in the logbook. That night, I sat up for hours with the lights on. The next day, the footprint was gone. I started reading the old logbooks more often. There were 3 volumes. Most of it was mundane weather readings, calibration notes, warnings about flickering terminals. But scattered through them were odd lines that felt more like personal journal entries. There was a tapping last night, but from inside the wall, not the outside. Heard whispering again. Thought it was the radio, but nothing was on. Couldn't catch the words. Saw someone in the tree line. Looked like me. vanished when I blinked. I didn't know whether to believe it. Maybe everyone assigned to C7 went a little off. Maybe it was cabin fever. Or maybe the people who came here already had something fraying at the edge. Maybe that's why they were sent. Still, I stayed. Because the strange truth was, I felt calmer than I had in months. The silence wasn't threatening. Not yet. The station had a pulse to it. I started walking the perimeter every morning with coffee in hand, staring at the fog-blanketed woods, like I was trying to remember a dream I hadn't had yet. I began sleeping with the window open, just a crack. Something about the cold, damp air made the dreams quieter, softer. But even in that stillness, something had begun to shift. I started hearing faint knocks behind the walls at night. Always 3. Then nothing. Once, I swear I heard breathing. Long and shallow, like something was lying just beneath the floor. I started recording the sounds. Not with the official relay instruments. I didn't want that data uploaded back to the main office. Instead, I dug out my old field recorder from grad school. It still had a few hours of battery life. Every night, before I slept, I placed it under my bunk and let it run. The knocks had become a pattern. Always between 2 and 3 a.m. Always 3 taps, evenly spaced. I tried to tell myself it was pipes